Hello, welcome back to another episode of Economics with Mr. Cole. And in this video, we'll continue with behavioral economics. This is the fourth and final part of the four-part series on behavioral economics. So if you haven't seen the first three parts, please click on the links to view them if you need a bit of revision or refresher. So we are still at the second question. How can firms and governments influence consumers to make desired choices? And we're now going over government nudges, changing behaviors without taking away choice. So essentially, nudges are behavioral, non-regulatory, and non-monetary interventions that steer individuals' behaviors by persuasion or example, right, towards their ultimate goals in line with government economic policy aims. Now, importantly, it's without eliminating any options or significantly changing the economic incentives. Nudges are subtle. They don't change the fundamental cost-benefit analysis, right? Taxes, subsidies, and price controls, all of these fundamentally change the cost-benefit ratio, whilst nudge policy presents a choice in a different way to encourage the socially beneficial choice. So it is theory based upon positive reinforcement on making the decision easy so that people become persuaded, right? And as such, make the desired choices. I'm going to go over a few examples. So as you can see, in the reduction of smoking, a nudging approach in behavioral economics would be to make non-smoking more visible through mass media platforms. For example, conveying the message that most smokers wish to stop, or the reduction of visuals that might be related to the act of smoking, such as by keeping cigarettes, lighters, and ashtrays out of sight. Out of sight, maybe out of mind. Compared to traditional interventionist approaches in classical economics that might be in form of excise tax on cigarettes, banning smoking in some public spaces. So banning smoking essentially takes away choice from consumers. And obviously, excise tax would change the fundamental cost-benefit ratio. And another example in the form of desired changes in behaviors, specifically reduction in alcohol consumption, perhaps serving drinks in smaller glasses or pints, making lower alcohol consumption more visible, perhaps through emphasizing mass media platforms that the majority of the population don't actually binge drink, right? In comparison with traditional interventionist approaches in terms of price regulation through, for example, minimum prices. So that raises the cost, right? So the fundamental cost benefit ratio has changed in the traditional approach, as well as raising minimum age for purchase of alcohol, again, restricting the choice of consumers. We've also got improving diets, as well as increasing physical activity. And for these, I'm just going to leave it here for your own reading. So do compare and contrast between nudging approaches and traditional interventionist approaches. Now, moving on, nudges are actually Well, can actually be based on choice architecture, which is a set of tactics designed to shape decision making using layout, sequencing, and a range of available choices. Firms and governments can use choice architecture to yield more of the results that they desire. So, for example, luxury goods being displayed more prominently um, at the entrance, whereas necessities are found in the greater depths of the store. So I'm going to go over three broad types of choice architecture: defaults, mandated choices, and restricted choices. Right? Defaults are pre-selected, and the decision maker must take active steps to opt out, such as in Singapore's example of Human Organ Transplant Act. So it covers all Singapore citizens and permanent residents, 21 years old and above, who are not mentally disordered, unless they've opted out. So they must actively choose the opt-out option, right? It is successful because the default choice may be viewed by consumers as the endorsement of sorts of the selection by a more informed party, so trusting the government. It may be reinforced by the status quo bias. So in one of the earlier examples, which I didn't go over in detail, which is improving diet, you could technically in restaurants change the default option from, for example, the side orders of French fries and making the default salads instead. Right. So a popular sentiment is usually assumed, though not necessarily always the case. And of course, societal tastes and preferences are dynamic, they change over time. Second, mandated choices, which is a requirement to make a choice. So consumers are required to state whether or not they wish to partake in a certain action. So, in contrast with defaults, in terms of choice architecture, options are presented as relatively equal and any choice as more explicitly voluntary. So, in this American example of Illinois, the individual who has passed the driving test would then obtain the driver's license, right, to show, to then decide whether one would like to be an organ donor or not, right? So mandated choice may be more popular than default. So Singapore uses a default option compared to this American example. So it's slightly different in terms of the choice architecture. Restricted choices, also a type of choice architecture. It actually manipulates consumers via the anchoring bias to encourage spending by having a menu item that is much more expensive than all the others. So, for example, in the restaurant, Fat Cow, in Singapore dollars, the prices are listed here. They do not expect many to order the most expensive item. So, probably not the Iwate beef grade. So instead, consumers might gravitate to the Omi, which is the second most expensive item on the menu because they have been anchored by Iwate. And rather than spending on the most expensive item, consumers might then decide to make a purchase or order the second most expensive item on the menu. Right. Now, governments, instead of, directly influencing consumers, can also attempt to maximize social surplus or societal welfare through indirect methods, and that is, of course, via firms. So governments can provide incentives to firms to apply behavioral insights in increasing societal welfare. So on skyscanner.com, which is a website to compare and contrast airline ticket prices, the governments or regulatory bodies might grant tax rebates to firms that make use of certain social cues to exploit consumer biases to go greener. So as you can see, there is the greener choice label that is tagged to the particular flights. And the display of the greener choice would then increase the visibility to passengers. So, availability bias as well as the salience bias, because it really jumps out at you, that green patch over there. It promotes actions that help with environmental sustainability. Right. So in terms of decoupling, right, via market incentives, government regulators can encourage firms to generate and utilize behavioral insights that nudge consumers to make desired choices. Right? Because in practice, firms interact with consumers in many different ways. It's not just via price mechanism or the dollar vote, signaling. It's not just that. It's not just about the prices. So firms may have nudges available that the government does not have. Utilities, for example, can decide what and how much information they would like to present to consumers. So obviously households that pay utilities in the form of electricity, water, gas. So firms can nudge consumers in ways to influence consumption patterns. Right. So if you're interested to find out more, you can go over the reading by Alcott and Mulanathan, 2010. Right. So, and also Brennan, 2008. Traditionally, basically, what the authors try to say is that traditionally, utilities charge consumers based on usage. If they can increase profits via a reduction in consumption, then they would have an incentive to nudge consumers to reduce usage. So decoupling means to decouple the retailer's profits from the quantities of electricity sold. So this is an example. As you can see, your U is quite salient over there. And then the use of the green color, the efficient neighbors. So, you're compared against your more efficient neighbors. And now that information is available to you, and utilities, can actually use such energy reports, in terms of household use that display energy consumption and make comparisons across neighbors in the neighborhood and even provide energy conservation tips, right? So then if that's the case, that probably also means that the government has provided some incentives to the utilities, possibly, first of all, decoupling. So firms don't just earn more profits based on the quantities of electricity sold, but rather, actually having how many customers they have and how much reduction consumers, are successful at in terms of lowering the amount of electricity used. Yeah, so this is an application, very interesting. Again, if you'd like to find out more, you can consult the readings that I've mentioned, very interesting articles. Right, so How can regulators convince utilities to nudge their consumers? So if you've been following what I've just said, you would be able to answer this question, right? Now, just some thinking aloud questions, really pause and ponder. A government nudge is a form of soft or liberal paternalism. A nudge is a euphemism for shoves. Do countries with low trust in the government regard it with cynicism or even suspicion? All right. Don't have a quick answer for these, but very interesting. Um, I guess reflection questions to ponder about. And of course, again, follow-up questions in a more exam-oriented format with reference to different examples, discuss the extent to which nudge theory may be used to create more socially efficient outcomes. 15 marks. And remember, the evaluative component is required for 15-mark type of questions. Discuss how a firm may apply the knowledge of consumers' cognitive biases to achieve its objectives. Also 15 marks. In Singapore's version of the A-levels, Higher 3, assess the extent to which behavioral economics is more helpful in understanding how economic agents make decisions than traditional models of economic theory. Right. And just a quick reminder, I provide tutoring online and in person as well for these syllabus codes as well as exam boards. Obviously, all economics. So feel free to reach out to me. All right. That's it for today. Goodbye.